aspects of securing this data, which brings in also digital technology in this landscape, which is of a great interest. So I suppose Husni could come in, and then Oliver, and others will join us online as they come along, but we are here. Dato Hussein? Dato Jazri, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Michaela. I suppose here is afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone.
Well, I think it's just about good afternoon here, actually, in London, but I don't know, in Australia, Keith is...
It's 9 p.m. in the evening over here.
Okay, fine. Anyway, but you come in when after that. Go ahead, Dato Husni. Because there is so much discussion about securing data, securing overall the state, and you can't do it without the involvement of everybody, and particularly the involvement of those involved in digital emerging technology. So go ahead.
Yeah, again, the issue of securing the digital landscape is not new. What's new is perhaps the medium and the dynamics of it, but the principles and the fundamentals remains the same. The way to look at is securing digital landscape. Still, we have to consider the technical as well as the regulatory requirements and the non-technical factors such as the human behaviors and so forth. And what's more important now is that the challenge of securing digital landscapes has become even greater than what it used to be, due to emerging technologies such as big data and the ability to maneuver perception through data analytics and so forth. And this has become a concern of many governments to date. But more importantly, what I find missing and not being discussed at all is the protection of the normal citizens who are working on the streets and citizens who are using the internet by themselves. These are the groups of people which I call the vulnerable ones. And to date, there is not much investment, or not much mechanisms and efforts are being made by the government to protect its citizens from the repercussions of security in the digital landscape. I guess I'm raising these issues because I have not seen one good, holistic and encompassing program that has been proposed and implemented by almost all countries, except the investments are very much, most of them, in fact, are very much put in focus on securing the government and securing the critical infrastructures and business infrastructures. But none are invested in a big way to secure the human security aspect of it. I think that's all what I want to say about the digital landscape for now.
Okay, to start us up. So, Oliver.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. But I think what we're looking at now is not the use of digital data, but mainly the abuse. So the abuse of data is now taken it's come to the forefront. One of the richest companies in the world has completely not even taken into consideration a proper security process, and has allowed access to millions of people's data. And now we're beginning to find out that perhaps this data is being used to influence political operations and destabilize opinions of other people through dirty tricks and use of data. And what we've seen before in the past is like the abuse of minerals, commodities, and will the next thing to hit some of the Commonwealth countries be the abuse of their own data through some of these larger corporate companies. And perhaps that's why they're not so welcoming to the likes of Facebook and Google, because if they are not playing ball here, they're monetizing people's data, and we don't know exactly where that data is going. So what we're looking at the moment is a pure abuse of data, and this is clear with what's happened with the Facebook case. This was abuse of data. So I think we need to go back to basics. Think about the
So
process.
the abuse of data is slightly beyond or the securing and
Well,
securing.
the security must come first, and the security must be given back to the individual. We're already responsible in many countries for the most important data that any government wants. And that's our taxable data and our health data. So in many countries, if we don't pay tax, the government will get very angry at us if we don't declare that we're making money. And this is a general rule globally, I believe. There's not one sort of government that says you don't have to declare tax, if I'm not wrong there. And then the other factor is the second most important part of data we own is our health data, and this is our responsibility to share the right data. So in terms of owning our own data and managing our own data, I believe the technology exists to do that today. We should just be given that access, and the likes of Facebook and Google, if they want to monetize our data, they should be giving us some sort of automated report at the end of the month. Who is exactly accessing that data? What is it being used for? This is not impossible.
You mean citizen to the big picture?
Yeah.
That interface.
They're quite
Well, an
clever.
interesting
Their algorithms
way.
are quite clever sometimes. Unless you put
Okay.
like a GPS, you can trick them sometimes.
Okay.
Can I just say, I think
Yeah,
it's very,
cut it.
it's very interesting in relation to what is happening at the moment with or has happened to the records of the landing cards for people coming from the Caribbean and so on.
Moses is from Tanzania.
The key is who makes the decision. Now, those people didn't have the data in their hands, so the decision was being made by whoever in a government department. And what you're arguing is the technology, the data technology now gives us the opportunity to make those decisions for ourselves. Is that right?
I believe, I don't know if the government will allow us to make all decisions for ourselves in certain ways, but we should certainly own all of our own data in many ways. We already do own most of it. We have to report our own data, the most important facts of it. What I'm saying is that the government needs to put more, or perhaps instead of looking at the individual, they need to start regulating these larger tech companies that are spreading this data out and not really tracking where it's going. I find it very hard to believe that a company such as Facebook could not see where its data might be used or in this case abused in many ways. And that's really important, because these guys aren't silly. They employ quite a lot of people, program their algorithms as well. And one thing I mentioned at the law note yesterday is we need to know who's behind these algorithms as well. So the data that's employed to write algorithms or how the algorithms make certain decisions, especially in the digital landscape when you're talking about things like insurance. This kind of data is really important. Because if Facebook is feeding out data on you and it's sort of like, perhaps like you hang around with a lot of smokers or drinkers, maybe they're going to up your insurance because that's the crowd you hang out with. And that's quite, so I mean, there's so many different facets of data that need to be looked at, and the securitization of data, the individual must be able to stand up and say, look, no, I've got proof. So in that case, they've got years of utility bills probably that prove they were here. And utility bills, we always have to use what we do, KYC, AML, they're banks.
So, you are a lawyer. Can you come in? He's just talking to you.
Well, I suppose there were two things
Nick.
I wanted to comment on, Oliver. The first was, it does seem to
A bit
me that
louder.
there are areas of governmental activity where they will need information that comes from individuals, but if that information is depersonalised, so, for example, in the health field, it seems to me that that's not actually necessarily a decision that an individual can take. I'm not going to share any of my data if it is on a depersonalised or anonymised basis. It seems to me one of the functions of a government to have that sort of information and to be able to use it to plan for healthcare and so on. So there's a sort of bifurcation between the individual personalised data which they will retain, and data which, as part of the society, it's accepted and people are reminded has to go through for a wider purpose.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think it's more on the updating of that data.
Yes.
So if I've had a medical checkup last year and then I've decided to go on a yearly binge of sort of drinking vodka and smoking,
yes.
smoking 20 cigarettes every day, and I don't tell the doctor that on that day, then I'm not giving the right data in, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then if something happens to me, I'm responsible for my bad health.
Yes.
That's what I mean, that
Yes.
the individual is responsible for the data in that way.
Yeah.
Nobody can help you unless you give them the right data.
If I can say something.
But
But
can I interject a little bit? But the challenge now is the individual has always been on the ignorant side. So the space, the level of ignorance from one individual to another with regards to protecting data and security and even privacy are not on the same level. So these are the issues which I think that not enough investments are being made, and not enough technological advancements are being focused into this direction.
So it's data and citizen, and data technologies in the landscape and the citizen, never mind the government, the infrastructure and everything else. And you had some proposals about that. Just a bit more, Oliver, and then Robert.
Yeah, just one more thing I say. It's interesting you say about the ignorance. There's like really two things there. You can't regulate stupidity, unfortunately, and that's just there. No, not yet. And the second thing is, like, we have health warnings, and we have warnings for other things. Now, what we need to do is, what the data companies are very good at is like making pages of contracts saying, do you agree to these terms? And most of us just scroll down and click a button because we're like, I'm not going to read all of that small type. Yeah. So we need to make these warnings a lot more shorter and quicker and have like some sort of data warning. Do you realise that your data, 2 lines, can be used for commercial reasons by a third party? Bang.
Yes, I mean, the other example of that with Facebook was that in there, any photograph you upload, you are giving them the copyright to. Okay? And that is the thing which was not publicised. Very few people realised that people would actually use any photograph you put, and they have the copyright to do so in doing so. But if I can actually bring out one other point that we've got here, and it's, I'm not sure what you mean by your relation of one, or the reality of one is there is a danger when we've got this sort of system that you have with Facebook, that because you are then feeding in a certain amount of information which they are then, without actually always your total consciousness about it, they are processing in a way where they're then feeding back to you messages which they think you're going to be receptive to. So you've actually got this sort of diversion, whereas previously people knew what was happening and so forth in the world, but actually you're making a thing where individuals' worlds are changing because their interaction in the internet is giving them different messages from what other people are getting, and they don't actually necessarily realise that. Normally, you know what you're expecting if you read the Telegraph, you know what you're expecting if you read the Times, but you don't know necessarily if somebody is individually making a message which is specific to you, okay? And it does tend then to make it so that society, if you like, and society's attitudes are going to get a bit less certain, a little less controllable, if you like, in a way that people have.
It is absolutely that. I mean, a simple example is if you and I do a Google search, we will come up with different results. Nobody will be able to predict what results come up. They'll just be different based on our differing behaviours. What concerns me more than that is if I do a Google search and then come back an hour later and do another one, I get a not completely different, but a sufficiently different set of results to ask myself, where did the other set of results go? Because there were still things that I was interested in looking at. So it's not that it's just a reality of one, that we see different things. It's that my reality changes in real time every half hour.
But I mean, we can see therefore the temptation and actually the great of the Center from Cambridge of Psychometrics, because psychometrics and behavioral kind of profiling of individuals, and then do something with the data that they got, not necessarily for elections only, but for anything else. And the question was that this is very much related to the citizen, not to the government as a whole. So, as Oliver was saying, it's not necessarily stupidity, but it is, or Hosni was saying, it is this interface between what you can do with citizens, one citizen's data, which is being collected as you go along, and how can you intervene so that it's being used in a fashion that you agree with it. Is there a technology that could evolve to do so? Because I don't think there is technology that can intervene between the one. Go ahead, Oliver. Maybe there is one in Sweden.
Well,
How do you go about in Sweden?
I think there's lots of technology. I mean, there's some, when you go on some sort of sites and you want to sort of subscribe to certain news information, you tick a number of boxes, right?
Yes.
So
give your email.
So maybe when you log on to Facebook in the future, it will say, for these services, will you tick this box? If you allow us to sell your data to third parties, then we will allow you access to these boxes. So it's just about process, really. It's about ticking boxes, the right boxes, and if you put it in plain English for people instead of like 20 pages of contractual law, then it's a lot easier. I mean, everyone's been on the site where you clicked a box, you know, like, what does your company do? We were in this sector, that sector, we're not in those sectors. It's a simple, I think, process that can be adapted in the interim, short time.
Okay. Robert.
Yes, I'm quite worried by this conversation which you started, Oliver. I'll explain why.
Okay. But you're more engineering, so.
First of all, I've heard it said recently, and I agree with this, that we're all in the business, if you like to look at life this way, of generating data. We're constantly generating data by means of everything we do, whether it's ticking boxes on web pages, or paying an electricity bill, a utility bill, or submitting a tax return, or even going to the shops and buying something and getting it recorded at the supermarket checkout what we've bought. All of this. Now, I don't feel competent to manage my own data. So your suggestion, which is what I understood, that everybody should be responsible for managing their own data, makes me uncomfortable. At the same time, I'm highly uncomfortable about other people, other organisations, including the government, managing my data for me.
And you would pay for it.
And there is another point that I want to bring in, which is I go to a web page, I tick boxes X, Y, Z, and I probably enter. I'm asked to generate a password or something, and I generate the password, and then I can guarantee that in a month's time, I don't think it's entirely old age, I will have forgotten all about that.
Unless you write it down.
So I leave a trail of data behind me, which the machines remember, presumably, because they don't forget unless there is some technical glitch. But I don't remember. I don't know. I don't want to remember, actually, in many cases. There was some discussion about keeping utility bills back to the year dot, so that you can prove you lived in this country, since 1953 or whenever. Well, Mihaela will tell you that I'm very bad for squirreling things away and, in fact, keeping them. But I don't want to be held to a requirement to keep them. That's a bad problem, it seems to me, and I don't know what the solution is.
Okay.
It's a problem all about data, and it's not entirely who manages it, but it's also about what needs to be kept, how is it decided what needs to be kept, and so on and so on.
Okay. Please, Michelle.
Hi. I just want to thank everybody because I have to
Okay.
my daughter for school.
Okay. You can join us again if you can. Tomorrow probably.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'll take that
Okay,
later.
please.
Sure. No, I was just going to
Michelle.
make a slightly quick point. I mean, as a slightly sort of younger person
Present
who uses
yourself.
a lot of...
Beside the fact that you are, Phil said you need to be
Yes.
here, we said
Oh,
yes.
who am I first? Okay, no, let me do a little bit of an introduction.
one
So
data.
I work at the University of Surrey, and I've done some stuff with Dr. Phil here within the Centre for Digital Economy, researching, digital technologies, but also I'm looking at educational programs around digital for the university and designing educational programs.
In Surrey.
In Surrey, at the Surrey Business School.
Okay.
I'm really sort of intrigued by the conversation, and I think as a slightly younger person who's very active on the social media scene, particularly in using a lot of the platforms we've talked about today, I think for me it sort of boils down to looking at the issue around control and where the power lies, within sort of who's holding that data, who has the power to control. Which is, to your point, do we actually have the power to, and the choice as well to actually choose how our data is actually used and how can we control that? That's a very interesting dynamic. And the fact that, a lot of us, younger people probably use a lot of social media without consciously thinking about, some of the stuff we are, putting down on our Twitter, on our, Facebook. How is that translated? How is that used? How is that used to almost build a profile of us? And how does that impact in terms of the future? So I'm really quite interested in getting some views on that.
But you mentioned control, and is it really a question of control?
No, I think
Because I don't think
I've paused that because to a certain degree, I think where you feel you don't have enough communication or you haven't been clearly informed because you haven't read the those terms. You're slightly misinformed. Because you haven't fully understood what you're actually getting yourself into by not reading those terms and conditions. So the power doesn't necessarily lie with you, and you don't have that much control or choice. Whether that's consciously or not. I think that's an issue, and it's very important that we can kind of communicate, as you were saying, very clearly. That are you happy with the fact that we're going to copyright your picture? And that is communicated very, very clearly, and you can make that choice. That choice then lies with you, the individual, and that is communicated with you quite clearly.
I think people need to recognise that with these companies, if they aren't selling you something, they're selling you.
Absolutely.
Of course, they give it to you for free. But
the answer is don't subscribe.
Be careful what you subscribe to.
Don't use any of that.
But I do think that we need to bring in. We need to come back. We look from the point of view of citizens. And Keith, I don't know in Australia if, but we were told a few months ago actually, that in Finland and probably there is in Sweden, there are various experiments with various policy frameworks and also with functions like chief data scientist, never mind a chief science advisor, but a chief data scientist. There was one in Washington and it's gone, not because of the reasons why everybody's going right now from there, but for reason that...
Well, maybe.
No, it wasn't. There was chief data scientists who were doing actually addressing specifically citizens' issues. But anyway, Keith, how is in Australia this debate?
We certainly do have chief scientists at both the national level and at state level. And there's a very interesting report that's been issued by the South Australian government entitled Digital Landscape. So the phrase you're using, Mihaela, has been picked up by at least one part of the Commonwealth. Could I make 2 points? One, regarding Robert and his passwords. Robert, there is now a new technology coming out to deal with people like you. It's called
that was what I was afraid of.
CRUSONA. It's a form of CIA technology, but it means you don't need to have a password.
Say again, please.
It's Frank Abnegale, formerly FBI, who's been promoting it. So that's a technology that you just simply scan into your phone, and that's it. And you can secure it with a driver's license as well. If I get onto a more bait, which I think flows into this, but at the other end, the worry that I have is the whole question of access to information technology. Because you've got to bear in mind that something like 30% of the world's population still haven't turned on an electric light. So there are a lot of people in the world who are not yet connected to the internet, and even in sophisticated societies like Australia, we have dead zones where you can't use your mobile phone. In fact, the new technology they've got here, even in central Sydney, I live just down the road from the Prime Minister, and this technology drops out as well. So my worry is a more basic one, the whole question of ensuring that we get adequate access to information technology for all citizens and not just the elites living in each country. So I've been encouraging the Australian foreign aid program to look at how we can augment the provision of information technology as part of our foreign aid program.
Right. But we were discussing that this issue of data are separate from the science as such.
Yeah.
In some countries, it got kind of quite. It was translated into a function of a chief data. It was added scientists, which confused the issue because most of the data is connected to what you can do with data science. But is there we had Phil? We had here in UK this attempt. It was a TAR rather than a chief data chief. What is the position here currently? I mean, we have an information commissioner, but that's not the chief data.
You've got the. It's like everything in the UK government. It's dispersed among a number of bodies. So a lot of people are looking at data and data regulation, and I think the two. If one makes a suggestion or a recommendation or has a conversation within government, the two bodies that spring to other people's words are the Open Data Institute, which is looking at making data accessible rather than controllable, and the Alan Turing Institute, which is looking at it from a mathematical data science type issue when they think about it. My concern is the Prime Minister
having a chief data advisor.
I cannot comment on that because
because probably it does take place, but in a different.
Yes, but where would you put it? I mean, where would you put it?
Yes,
down her corridor.
If you put it in a department other than the Cabinet Office,
then
nobody else would take any notice of it.
Yeah.
This is the thing.
I mean, I agree with you. You would put it in the Cabinet Office, which isn't perhaps geared. That's more geared up to control rather than doing things.
It's the only one that can get others to do it.
Correct.
You know, that's really what its role is.
Yes.
It's activating other people.
But my work within government, it's really very fragmented in terms of.
But the chief scientist
has just retired, or has just retired.
No,
but there's a new one, and
yeah.
I think he's still sorting his priorities out. But a recommendation I made recently was we do need a data body that is similar to, and we've done it. We've cracked the problem with human fertilisation and embryology, and we've cracked it with the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, where statutory bodies say you can do this, you cannot do that. Right. We will have that debate, we won't have that debate. And I can't see it beyond the wit of this government to do something similar for data. But I don't, my personal feeling is they're not ready to do that yet, so it goes to the ODI and the ATI, and it becomes a digital issue, not a social issue. It should be a social issue. But that's an ongoing debate.
In France, Alan, because Macron is known as bringing new...
Well, this issue of the protection of personal data is, like many issues, the answer is a combination of regulation and good practices, I would say. Yeah? So, in the European Union, there is a European directive on the protection of personal data, which is horribly complex because the subject is horribly complex, and I cannot explain the detail of that directive, but I know it exists. And then the regulation sets obligations to those who are in a situation to capture your personal data and what they have to do in order to make you aware or to forbid them from taking your data or exploiting your data for commercial purposes and so on. Now, for any regulation, there is the principle of the regulation. You have fines if you don't abide to the regulation. And then, if you are an operator, you have to, well, how am I going to implement that regulation? What are the good practices to implement that regulation? And if I may plead for that sector, this is where consensual standards come into the picture. So there are a number of standards being developed in ISO and other places at the European level in order to enable online operators to deal with the complex implementation of a regulation that they don't always understand the subtlety of. I will give you a precise example in France. You asked a question about France. AFNOR, the French member of ISO, developed 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was a voluntary standard on how you use the appreciation of consumers on an online service like TripAdvisor or any sort of service where you have stars, and it has a big influence on your choice, because if you see a hotel booking TripAdvisor with 5 stars and people say it's good. I don't know if you've had that experience. I won't tell the brand, but I've had the experience where on a particular service that I was providing as an individual, I find myself with 5 stars and comments of people that I knew had never used that service. So that's an example where you could have voluntary standards developed to help implementing the principles of a regulation. In Europe, regulation is mostly done by setting essential requirements for safety or behavior or whatever, and then letting the market players, so to speak, develop the technicalities of how you implement, how you apply these basic principles. And this is a huge area and difficult, because by definition the internet is global, and therefore your data can be brought in the EU or elsewhere and exploited. Now, there are connections between this subject and the fiscal situation of the GAFA, the Google, Amazon, Alibaba, Facebook, and Microsoft guys, who, by the way, are the 5 major companies in the world today. They have replaced Exxon and so on. And these companies are now more powerful than states, and there is a big fight there that the regulator has eventually to win somehow. So how is this done internationally? Where does the sort of like, you know, on let's say health, you have the World Health Organization. Now, where is the World Data Organization, which is a subset of the United Nations, working on the issue of data? So nowadays it is in 2 places really. One is ITU, because it has to do with the internet, and but ITU has tried to be the UN of the internet, but has not succeeded, because the Americans are holding the thing with the governance of the internet, and they don't want to let go. So there are huge interests out there. But to come back to the basics, you need to have a regulation spelling out the obligations for the citizens, because like Robert, you don't want cars to drive too fast on the roads, but who are you to set the speed? So the state says 90 kilometers per hour, okay? Then I abide to that. Then if you go faster, you get a fine. So the regulator has to play its role, and the industry, and also the consumers, because voluntary consensus-based standards are made with the contribution not only of the industry but of the users, etc. And this is happening, but not at the same speed as the problem is developing of data, because that's the big difficulty we have with data, is the speed at which the problem is developing, and also its impact on democracy, which is hair-raising. And it starts with getting the acts together and having some UN data organization spelling out the principles. But this is not for tomorrow, because some countries make great use of the loopholes in the system. I want big countries starting with an R, they are very happy that for the moment the situation is like that.
Okay, Oliver.
Just Alan mentioned something that is quite interesting and something I've been thinking about when we've been dealing with different EOs around different EOs issues. I saw an EO yesterday, that's why I said that. We've been talking about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and one thing was existing framework that can help standards. And when you mentioned consumer there, I was wondering, because I know you've worked with standards a lot on consumer protection. So the consumption of data is something else we've got to look at. So as a consumer, as I'm consuming this data, am I actually consuming what I think I'm consuming? As you pointed out, like am I being told the whole story, and is it the real story? So do you think some of the existing consumer protection laws and the international work there sort of build some sort of loose framework at the moment?
Well, it is about consumer protection, the whole issue, because it's protecting you against something so that you are consuming otherwise, because most of the data that you provide is related to an act either of buying or soliciting, applying for something. Or the other source is, of course, when you voluntarily share your data, and this is what was mentioned about Facebook and so on, where nowadays employers screen Facebook to have a Facebook profile of the candidates. And young people are not so aware of that, and then they find themselves, they can't get a job because, the Facebook profile is not very good. You showed yourself naked in a public garden and that sort of thing, or drinking beer and so on, and you can't be an employer with us. So, and there's also a lot of information and making people aware of these things. So, but clearly, the countries, the regional cooperation, and the international world need some kind of authority. And unfortunately, ITU, which is the International Telecom Union, which is a subset of the UN, is trying to play that role. But there is the American dominance, which prevents that. And so.
But there was in the last 2 years, David Omand made us aware. He was part of a global think tanking developed specifically on the issues of data, not necessarily citizens and data. It was more to do with security. Security in terms of cybersecurity, intelligence, and so on. But and that was dealt with from Canada and from Chatham House. The report is available and is one of the best available report and work done, and was launched at OECD about a year ago in March. It's very, very useful to look at. The only problem was that there isn't anybody, nor in the countries, nowhere, to try to continue to observe what they've been assessing and actually to implement various things on the way. So there is a body of knowledge of the kind. And one of the things they were saying was there isn't anything but, and they brought in this issue of scale-free networks to be encouraged to interconnect webs and so on, and to actually self-control themselves in relation to one's data. Yeah, there is a different issue about the global intelligence and the national intelligence, which in itself cannot be dealt with anymore without engaging all the others. And this was our issue, which was brought in since last year in this program that needs to be developed. That there is no way to ensure that the conventional intelligence and security, defense and otherwise of a state can take place in similar way as it did take place in the past. So the idea of having a Ministry of Defense divorced from Ministry of Energy or whatever, divorced in the sense of not that they are not, but it doesn't work, because if you want to do a strategic kind of securing the state, everybody has to be part of it. He made that point to the central bank governors, David Oman, saying that they have a seat, they should have a seat on an equivalent of a national security council, and a very important seat, any central bank governor. Now, the central bank governor, if you think about, he's talking about, they have a data, also, they have data of all kinds, including data from that woman on the side of the road who's using this mobile to get some money. Now, would that person be interested in the fact that if she uses a mobile, somebody is collecting automatically the fact that she got 1 penny and she paid back 2 pennies or whatever to do this and that? She's not going to be interested. So in freely, giving the data to whoever wants to use that. So there are a number of issues which can only be tackled at the national level, but within national level probably, which is what this report, I'm going to dig it up. I have a physical manifestation of it. Through scale-free networks. Now the understanding of what are these scale-free networks is probably, in a plain English, would be essential for dealing with these issues of data and because there is nobody, data and the new notion of control. The control came in about 40 years ago, isn't it? We were interested so many years ago in systems analysis, in cybernetics. All these things are still there, but they are not really valid in the context of data age.
I think perhaps they are valid, Mihaela, but they require re-examination and reinterpretation. They are valid.
Yeah, I mean the systematic analysis that he was talking about, and Omar quite right, Stephen, before, that systematic analysis appeared on this possible for so many years, 40, 50 years ago, but and complexities, what Yanir was talking about, again evolved in the last 20 years or so from the defense angle, but then it became quite so the issue of data and citizen probably in our own program probably has to be emphasized. Husni, that's why he came in, he has, and he will come in tomorrow, he has a kind of idea about how one could emerge a program around citizens and securing the data. Keith, you are online still?
Yes, I'm finding all this very fascinating indeed. Thanks, Mihaela.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but you come in if you want at any time. Mike, you are still online? No. Okay, that's all right. Because we need
to add what...
you are online. Thank you.
I am online. I'm confused.
Okay, thank you.
It's Kit here. To what Alan says, I think we do have a problem of this on the international side. It's a little bit like what happened in the Middle Ages with the Hanseatic League, okay, and the kings of the countries, okay. Kings of the countries were only interested in the land. Hanseatic League, they were interested in trade, and they then had their own network of trade amongst themselves and so forth, which actually the various countries and so forth rather ignored because they were only ever worried about land. And then later, of course, trade obviously came as being more important, and some of those questions about regulating trade and what happened with trade and so forth became difficult for them. With the internet, we started off with a problem, which was it came about partly because of a sort of ideas about how communication should be free amongst people and government shouldn't have anything to do with it. And there was a great resistance when the internet was first being, if you like, made more popular amongst the people, not to have any sort of government involvement, those nasty people doing anything. So we lost things at the past at that time, which have led to a number of things which are now, I think, almost difficult or almost impossible to get back, like the dark web or anything like that, because those opportunities for a real regulation or anything like that have gone. They will be very difficult now to get into the international agreement to be involved with it. As you say, you've got also the commercial pressure in the US for holding on to their dominance of the internet and so forth. Are we actually ever going to have that sort of degree of agreement across the nations for that sort of regulation? So I think that what regulation we're going to have is essentially going to be sticking plaster type of dealing with problems. Okay?
That's quite an important issue, and I think we're worried about the abuse of data, but I think when we think about the use of data, the individual who even only has a marginal use of computing, you've got an enormous amount of knowledge available to you, which you never had before, or you had it, but in a much less accessible form. And if you've got grandchildren, as I have, who are currently studying for GCSE and so on, I mean, it's totally altered education from when I was. So, but you're right. We are voluntary in a sense, and we're sort of volunteering ourselves in a sense by having all of this value from it, and so it's a bit difficult to turn around and say, but you're spoiling our lives with it as well. You know, you could. It's sort of, is it cost effective to introduce all the regulation when we want to have untrammeled access?
Yeah, Oliver.
No, I think you're quite right, but I think what Alan was saying is about 5 people in control of this data now, 5 big organisations.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if our children and grandchildren get education from these sources and they begin to social engineer the grandchildren to their own means and ways, and you have seen this a lot, that the views of these large leaders of these companies are very reinforced on their platforms. This is a real danger because it takes away the freedom of choice, freedom of even personal thought in many ways. We've always been influenced by things that are, around us. This is why I think that the people who write algorithms or any AI should be, these records should be stored in a very safe place, especially in terms of if this AI makes decisions for us. So I think there must be a balance, and I think there must be punishment for the misuse of data, especially when it leads to turmoil in some places. I just think there should be, it's like if you go around and say something malicious about someone or slander them, there should be, there are legal remedies for this. Yeah.
Actually, on Monday, we did have Professor David Hand, who gave a quite good picture about the data issues, not necessarily citizen, but data as such. And also we had Yanir, who brought in the fact that all the connections between the various users or producers of this data can only be dealt with applying particular modeling of the type that is adapted to this based on complexity or agent-based modeling or whatever it is. But if you who is that? Who is online?
I'm online,
Okay, Tom. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good.
Very good. Very good. So, the issue of an ongoing national at all levels scanning of the data use and data users and data producers up to the family probably could bring up on the way some sort of self-regulation, if it's a regulation. There is no other way. There isn't, because when you say scale-free networks, which is, there are scale-free networks, you see them in the nature and you see them in technology. So among the humans, probably something similar will emerge, I'm sure about that. And the artificial intelligence actually comes into that. But
I believe that great scandals will help. Because I have seen, for instance, well, may help, let's put it like that. And it pushes politicians because the subject is of interest to their constituency, and therefore they can gain something on if they engage in supporting a policy which will help improving. So I'm not calling for scandals because we have quite a few of them yet already. And then you have another issue, which is the characteristic of the humans. Some of them are greed, curiosity, and the desire to show off. Now, in the Cambridge Analytics, for instance, some of those who were providing information were paid, and they were thinking that they were paid for some scientific purpose. But they got a little money for the information that they were giving.
For research.
They didn't know that it was for something else. That's greed. Curiosity is, I visit thousands of websites, I leave a little trace so that I'm informed. And the desire to show off is that, and this is when you put the information about yourself that you would like to be, maybe not what you are exactly. So of course, if it's a date of birth, for instance, you may put your date of birth, or you may put a younger date of birth because you want to be seen as younger. So man has overcome a number of difficult issues, sometimes at a cost. But as you say, I think it will eventually come. And it's a combination of regulation, scandals, to push politicians to take regulation, and good practice of all the economic actors, and this is voluntary standards.
I suppose there has to be an incentive, a new type of incentive.
Karen, I have to go soon and behave with it. I think Alan's right, because we all know that there used to be the big five auditing companies, and then they became the big four after Enron, whatever. And this is what somebody's going to have to learn the hard way, and maybe we're beginning. I think we've only just seen the tip of the iceberg, really, with Cambridge Analytics, and I think it was perhaps maybe a little bit of bragging rights by the ex-CEO there that he said we could do these things. And
Tom, you have
I'm listening. I've been listening for a while.
Okay, so you tell us what did we discuss?
I use data in my work, development, and I have to research data, access it, etc. And the models we complain about, there are good and bad aspects of them. When I do use a search engine, that search engine knows my history. And there's a good side and a bad side. And that is that when I'm looking for something, it knows my history. And despite all the other forms where people can pay to be prioritized, what becomes prioritized in my research is the kinds of things that my history tells me that I'm looking for. And so it is very useful in data searches on food production, on trade, etc. that I use. The downside of it is that it eliminates novelty in the sense that I wish that they had where I could go use a search engine and temporarily turn off the history so it brings up stuff that I'm not looking for that I want to discover and need to discover. And so it's such a convenience that it can be overpowering and make you lazy. Because when I do literature searches, I always find what I'm looking for because I have a huge history that they can draw upon, and it's very helpful because there's this vast amount of data out there. The other aspect of it is that the data is in a world in which there's disruption, and the pace of change that is occurring in the world today is overwhelmingly beneficial, but it is disruptive, and that means that some people lose. And we haven't learned in the last centuries. After all, we've had centuries of industrial revolution, scientific change. We've had massive, rapid change, unprecedented, and we don't learn then to smooth the transition of change by using the great gains that we made and spreading the benefits. And of course, everyone knows English history and the textile history, the weavers, all the other aspects of textiles massively technologically improved, which led to a huge demand for weavers. And so you had all this massive weavers, and then suddenly you get the power loom, and they're put out of work. And so you get the word sabotage from throwing your shoes into the machine. And so we see that now and then. I may not say that one of the factors that led to the electing of a demagogue, and that's an understatement in the U.S., was the fact that there are people in the United States who were economically working class, who had done very well, who have been disruptive and hurt by trade that has been overwhelmingly beneficial. And we haven't figured out a way to bring about transitions so that those who are hurt by it can somehow be compensated. And so we live in a world of disruption and change and data, and the fact is that those who command the data command the power. And but the final point I want to make, and since you referred to Cambridge Analytica, I think the use of that data, their ability to use it was overrated. I mean, put it this way, a shift of 40,000 votes in 3 states, and Trump would not have been elected, and nobody would have even given them any credit for anything. After all, I won't go into details on this group, but in the 3 states that Hillary lost that she should have won, there were all sorts of signs, the local politicians, etc. She wasn't campaigning there, so we could find a multiplicity of other reasons. We should not always focus in on a particular thing like Cambridge Analytica, however wrong that was, and give it more credit than it deserves, because all you do then is you give those who develop these tools an opportunity to make more money, because people are going to go out and buy them.
Yeah, well, I mean, so thank you, Tom. Now, I wanted to ask Phil, because you are here. Phil, this issue of the actually the methodology that has been developed, and if it wasn't to be developed in Cambridge, it would be developed somewhere else. It just happened it was there, so some of the best people attracted, and they engaged Canadians and they engaged who knows what else they did. It's probably, I agree with Tom, is overrated the attention given to Cambridge Analytica. The only reason why probably that came about is because probably there is not enough debate about the data and the citizen, and also on particularly how you deal with Facebook or anything else when you are kind of freely using it without realizing the consequences of it. So, I mean, is there a need for an inquiry in the UK system or international about situations like Cambridge Analytica, which may emerge or they're already there with different names? Because once it's done, you can't stop it. Everybody else will replicate it.
Yes, I mean, once it's out, not necessarily to answer that question, but to address a wider issue.
Yeah.
What fascinates me about it is that and it's a shame Oliver's gone, but the control of one's data, especially in a technical environment, is a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
I mean, the passports, passwords, you can write on a piece of paper and put it in the file called gardening or something. But the managing my own managing my own data and access to it takes a lot of effort, and we've got a couple of experiments running with students, and even though you're grading them, you start with 100 students, and after a week you've still got 20 students involved. But the other thing I find fascinating is that allegedly the geeks who are doing all this express surprise that their work has been traduced into something else. We're just solving technical problems and solving algorithms. We're having fun with the arithmetic. All of a sudden somebody's going to come along and used it for a completely different reason. And I find that very interesting, because I think that is new, that people are, well, we didn't know it was going to be used for this. Well,
hello, Professor, are you still there?
Yeah.
Why are you not thinking about this?
Well, I think that's where our first speaker started, really, the exploitation of,
Stefan.
of technology.
But it's also of the technicians themselves seem to have been exploited.
So
knowingly, have they been exploited knowingly?
They claim to be unknowingly.
Yeah.
Certainly reading some of the transcripts.
I mean, the consequences of the attention given to Cambridge Analytica in relation to Facebook, one is saying is that is thinking that even the Brussels GDPR, the government regulation, data regulations, are coming in because that was observed and noticed that is taking place, and no one could intervene in any other way. There is this young lawyer from Austria and all the rest of it in the last 3 years or 4 years. But imagine that globally, that is Brazil or wherever it is, that is China. All these things probably are emerging. So there is the only way probably to deal with it if there is a kind of essence of what has happened, not necessarily focus on Cambridge Analytica in relation to data.
But it's interesting talking about scandal or disasters. If you look back over other technologies, that it needed a disaster for everybody to come together and manage it differently. So the oil industry didn't share its data until the Piper Alpha disaster, when they suddenly decided that actually sharing data might be more useful than not.
This is the entire history of technology, actually, and I would go back much further than that and say that in the 19th century they didn't realise that they had to fit safety valves to boilers until they had quite a lot of explosions which killed people in the absence of safety valves. So, you know, it's absolutely true. Fitting guards to machinery as well. Again, this came slowly as a result of accidents. It always happens like that because people actually are quite myopic. Or it's a difficult problem. You don't know what the problems are going to be until you actually experience them.
So, I mean, one of the reasons why today it was quite a kind of left free-flowing, the discussion, although we discussed about data on Monday and we discussed about digital landscape both in connection with the central banks, the statistics, and will standards, and we'll discuss tomorrow, and so on, was because the issue of, David Oman was saying that the issue of data and citizen is essential for any project or program that we would undertake, and that's something that is not being identified in this, for instance, program, because there is no institutional, an institution, particularly in any country, that it is in Tanzania or in UK, that is preoccupied with the issue of data and citizens. So we need to probably build it in and as valid within each and every initiative, so to speak.